Kira's stomach twisted with hunger as she stood in the food court of Nexus Station. The bioluminescent mark on her forehead, the brand of her people's defeat, glowed faintly under the harsh lights. She hated that mark. It was burned into her DNA when her homeworld surrendered 20 years ago, passed down to every child born after the war. A permanent reminder that her species had lost, and the galaxy would never let them forget it. The food court was massive, stretching 3 levels high with vendors from 100 different worlds. The air smelled like spices she couldn't name, sizzling proteins, and the sharp tang of recycled station atmosphere. Everywhere she looked, aliens sat at tables, eating, laughing, living their lives without a second thought. She'd been standing there for 10 minutes, trying to gather courage. Her shift had ended an hour ago. 16 hours of crawling through maintenance tunnels, fixing air recyclers that higher-caste species wouldn't touch. Her back ached. Her hands were scraped raw. And she hadn't eaten in 2 days. The credits were real. She'd earned them. But earning them and spending them were 2 different things when you wore the mark. Kira approached the first vendor, a noodle stall that smelled incredible. Her mouth watered. She held out her credit chip with a shaking hand, not making eye contact. Maybe if she was quiet, if she didn't cause trouble, they'd just let her buy something. The scanner beeped red. Access denied. Caste violation. Her heart sank. Please, she whispered, still not looking up. I have credits. I can pay. The vendor, a hulking Draxian with scales like armor plating, sneered down at her. His voice was loud enough that people at nearby tables turned to look. Your kind buys from Sector 9. Not here. Can't you read? He pointed at a small sign she'd somehow missed. In a dozen languages, it listed which castes were permitted to purchase from this vendor. Sarans weren't on the list. They never were. Sector 9's vendors are closed, Kira said softly. They're always closed when I... Not my problem. Move along before I call security. Kira backed away, face burning with shame. Several aliens at the nearby tables were watching now. She could feel their eyes on her mark, judging her, dismissing her. She moved to the next stall. A fruit vendor. Maybe they'd be kinder. The scanner beeped red again. Sorry, the vendor said, not sounding sorry at all. Protocol is protocol. The third vendor didn't even let her finish approaching. He waved her away like she was a pest. The fourth vendor called security the moment she got close. A drone descended, hovering at her shoulder with a mechanical voice. You are in violation of approved caste boundaries. Disperse or face citation. Kira stumbled backward, nearly tripping over her own feet. The drone followed her for a few steps before returning to its patrol route. That's when she heard the laughter. A group of well-dressed aliens sat at a premium table near the center of the food court. Higher caste species, the kind who wore expensive clothes and had personal translator devices that hung in the air like jeweled insects. They'd been watching her entire humiliating journey from vendor to vendor. One of them, a Veltharai with purple skin and elaborate head crests, spoke loudly in her own language. Her translator device broadcasted for everyone to hear. Look at that Saran, begging for scraps. How pathetic. Another one, something reptilian that Kira didn't recognize, clicked his teeth in amusement. They should have fought harder in the war. Now they pay the price. Natural order. I heard they eat garbage in Sector 9, a third alien added. Maybe that's where she should go. With the other trash. More laughter. Not just from their table. Others nearby were chuckling too, glancing at Kira and then away, like she was an amusing distraction from their meals. Kira felt tears burning her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of them. She'd learned early that tears only made it worse. They enjoyed it more when you cried. Her legs felt weak. The hunger was making her dizzy. She'd skipped too many meals this week, saving credits for the rent increase on her closet-sized quarters. She thought she could make it to payday. She'd been wrong. Station security drones hovered throughout the food court, their sensors sweeping over the crowd. She knew they'd seen everything. They'd watched her get denied, watched her get mocked, watched her suffer. But they did nothing. This wasn't a crime. This wasn't disorder. This was the caste protocol, the ancient law that had governed galactic society for thousands of years. Everyone knew their place. Everyone accepted it. Everyone except the Sarans, apparently, who kept stupidly hoping things might change. Kira pressed a hand to her stomach, trying to calm the gnawing emptiness. Maybe she could make it back to her quarters. Maybe she had some nutrient paste left in her storage unit. It would be expired and taste like chemicals, but it was better than nothing. She turned to leave, vision blurring slightly from exhaustion and hunger. That's when she heard the voice. Different from the others. Concerned. "Hey. You okay?" Kira froze. She turned slowly, afraid she'd imagined it. A human male stood a few feet away, maybe 30 years old, with dark hair and tired eyes. He wore a cargo hauler's jumpsuit, faded and stained with work. His name patch read, Jake Tyler. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen directed at her in a long time. Genuine concern. Kira's voice came out as barely a whisper. "I can't, they won't." She gestured helplessly at the vendors, at her glowing forehead mark, at the laughing aliens who were now watching this new development with interest. Jake followed her gesture. His eyes moved from the vendors to the security drones to the mocking crowd. His jaw tightened. Something shifted in his expression. He looked back at Kira, and his next words were simple. Direct. 3 words that would change everything. "Come eat with me." The food court went silent. Not gradually. Not slowly. It was like someone had flipped a switch and turned off all sound except the hum of ventilation systems and the distant clatter of kitchen equipment. Jake walked to the nearest vendor, the same Draxian who'd sneered at Kira minutes before. The alien's expression shifted from contempt to confusion as Jake stepped up. "2 of whatever's hot," Jake said, tapping his credit chip on the scanner. The Draxian processed the order without a word, but his eyes kept flicking to Kira, who stood frozen a few feet away. He knew what was about to happen. Everyone knew. Jake took both trays, steam rising from bowls of something that looked like stew with thick noodles. He walked to a public table right in the center of the food court, set one tray down on one side, and placed the other across from it. Then he sat down and looked at Kira. "Come on," he said simply. Kira's feet wouldn't move. Every instinct screamed at her to run. This was wrong. This was against every rule. Humans were mid-tier in the hierarchy, still far above Sarans. What he was offering wasn't just charity. It was contamination. It was social suicide. But the smell of that food. Her stomach clenched so hard it hurt. She took one step forward. Then another. Around her, she could feel hundreds of eyes tracking her movement. Translator devices lit up across the food court, buzzing with urgent whispers in a dozen languages. Is he actually going to? Sharing a table with a Saran. Doesn't he know the protocols? Contaminating himself. Kira slid into the seat across from Jake, her whole body shaking. The tray sat in front of her like a mirage. The Saran girl stared at the food like it might disappear if she blinked. "It's real," Jake said, picking up his own spoon. "Go ahead." All around them, aliens whispered. The volume was rising now, shock giving way to outrage. Translator devices buzzed with disgust, broadcasting the scandal in real time to every corner of the station. A human. Mid-tier in the hierarchy. Sharing a table with a Saran. Touching food that would touch the same table where her hands had touched. Where her breath had touched. Where her presence had contaminated the very air. The violation. The absolute horror of it. At the table where the well-dressed aliens sat, the Velthari woman stood up, her face twisted in disgust. "This is obscene," her translator announced loudly. "That human has contaminated himself. Someone call an arbiter." Kira's hands trembled as she reached for the spoon. She was so hungry it hurt. Her vision kept going fuzzy at the edges. But she was terrified. Terrified of what would happen to her. Terrified of what would happen to this human who didn't seem to understand what he'd just done. "They'll punish you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You don't understand. They'll fine you. They'll mark your record. They might kick you off the station." Jake took a bite of his stew, chewing thoughtfully. "I understand fine. Eat your food before it gets cold." "But why?" Kira's voice cracked. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Why would you ruin yourself for a Saran?" Jake set down his spoon and looked at her directly. "Where I come from, we've got problems. Lots of them. But we decided a long time ago that watching people starve while we eat isn't something we're going to do. That's not negotiable." "But the protocols." "I didn't sign any protocols," Jake said. "I signed a docking agreement and a trade license. Nobody asked me to agree to let people go hungry because of some ranking system." A security drone descended from the ceiling, its red sensor light blinking. It hovered between them, projecting a holographic warning symbol that rotated in the air. "Cast protocol violation in progress," its mechanical voice announced. "Human Jake Tyler and Saran Kira 7743, you are in violation of social contamination laws. Cease contact immediately or face citation. Jake waved his hand through the hologram like he was swatting a fly. Yeah. Send me the bill. The drone hovered uncertainly, as if it hadn't expected that response. Its programming probably didn't account for someone just not caring about the consequences. Kira picked up her spoon with trembling fingers. The moment it touched the broth, tears spilled down her cheeks. She couldn't stop them anymore. She took a bite, and it was the most delicious thing she'd ever tasted. Or maybe she was just that hungry. She took another bite, then another, trying not to sob. The crowd parted like water as a tall figure approached. Kira's blood went cold. She recognized the robes. The insignia. The way other aliens automatically moved out of his path. A hierarchy arbiter. An enforcer of the caste protocol. One of the most powerful officials on any station. He was tall and thin, with pale blue skin and eyes that looked almost white. His species had been maintaining galactic order for 3,000 years. They took the protocol seriously. Human, the arbiter said, his voice cold and precise. His translator device didn't buzz like the others. It was surgically implanted, speaking with his own voice. You are contaminating yourself. This saran is prohibited from this dining area. Your association with her kind carries a fine of 10,000 credits and potential expulsion from this station. Jake looked up from his meal, still chewing. He swallowed before responding. Okay, he said. The arbiter blinked. You acknowledge the violation. Sure. But I'm still going to finish my dinner. Your defiance will be noted in your permanent record, the arbiter continued, his voice rising slightly. You will be banned from 17 coalition stations. Your trading license will be flagged. This will follow you everywhere you go. Jake considered this for a moment. Then he shrugged. Well, I guess I won't be going to those 17 stations. Are we done here? The simplicity of Jake's response seemed to short-circuit the arbiter's entire argument. He stood there, opening and closing his mouth, as if searching for words that would make this human understand the magnitude of his error. Finally, the arbiter swept away, his robes trailing dramatically behind him. This violation is recorded. The consequences will follow. As he left, Jake turned back to Kira. She was crying openly now, stuffing food into her mouth between sobs. Easy, Jake said gently. Don't make yourself sick. Why? She asked again, her voice breaking. Why would you do this? You just destroyed your career for someone you don't even know. Jake was quiet for a moment, watching aliens hurry past their table, giving them a wide berth as if their rule-breaking was contagious. You know what I saw back there? He finally said. I saw someone who was hungry. Someone who had money to pay. And I saw a bunch of people who decided she didn't deserve to eat because of something that happened before she was born. He shook his head. That's not complicated. That's just wrong. Kira looked down at her half-empty bowl, at this impossible meal, at this human who'd just thrown away his future for a principle. Thank you, she whispered. Finish your food, Jake said, returning to his own meal. We'll worry about the rest later. Around them, the food court slowly returned to its normal noise level. But nothing was normal anymore. Something had broken that couldn't be fixed. And everyone knew it. By evening, word had spread through the human quarters of Nexus Station. It traveled fast the way news always does in tight-knit communities. Cargo hauler Jake Tyler had violated caste protocol. He'd shared a meal with a Saran. The arbiters were threatening sanctions, fines, possible expulsion. Most species would have shunned Jake immediately. Cut ties. Pretended they didn't know him. That's how you survived under the protocols. You didn't make waves. You didn't question the system. Humans, apparently, had different ideas. It started in the cargo bay where Jake's ship was docked. A woman named Beth Rodriguez, captain of a heavy freighter, heard the story from her engineer. She listened, nodded slowly, and said 4 words, "Get everyone together. Now." Within an hour, all 4 to 7 humans on Nexus Station had gathered in the cargo bay. Pilots, engineers, traders, mechanics, janitors. Men and women in worn jumpsuits and work boots, smelling of grease and sweat and honest labor. They ranged from 20 years old to 60, from a dozen different countries back on Earth, but they all had one thing in common. They were far from home, and out here, humans looked after humans. So here's the situation, Beth said, standing on a cargo container so everyone could see her. Jake did something today that's got the station authorities in a twist. He bought food for someone who was hungry. Apparently, that's a crime here. I heard she was a Saran, someone called out. Bottom of the hierarchy. She was, Jake confirmed, standing near the back. Still is. That's the problem. A older man named Frank, who ran maintenance on 3 different human ships, spoke up. The protocols are serious business. They've been in place for thousands of years. Every station runs on them. Yeah, and they're garbage, said a young pilot named Diane. I've watched low-caste workers get denied medical treatment. Seen them get paid half what we make for the same work. Seen them sleep in corridors because they can't afford quarters. It's wrong. Wrong doesn't matter if we all get kicked off the station, someone else argued. We've got contracts. Jobs. Families depending on us. Beth held up her hand. Everyone shut up for a minute. Let me ask you something. Show of hands, how many of you joined the merchant fleet to get rich? No hands went up. A few people laughed. Right. We're here because Earth needed people willing to haul cargo to the edge of known space. We're here because someone had to do the dirty work. We're here because we're stubborn and stupid and we don't quit. She looked around at the crowd. So I'm asking, are we going to let some ancient hierarchy tell us who deserves to eat and who doesn't? What are you suggesting? Frank asked. Beth smiled. I'm suggesting we have dinner. All of us. Together. And we invite some guests. That's when things got interesting. At 1900 hours, every human on Nexus Station walked into the main food court. It wasn't organized. There was no formation, no plan beyond the simple idea Beth had planted. They just came, drifting in by ones and twos and small groups, converging on the food vendors. The vendors saw them coming and tensed. Humans weren't usually trouble, but 47 of them moving with purpose? That was unusual. Beth walked up to the Draxian vendor who denied Kira earlier. We need food. A lot of it. 4 to 7 meals, whatever's hot. The vendor processed the order, confused but compliant. Humans paid well and didn't usually cause problems. He filled the order, watching nervously as the humans collected their trays. Then they spread out across the food court, and the vendors understood. The humans sat down with every Saran they could find. With the Kelthians who scrubbed the lower decks. With the Harvin who processed waste recycling. With every low-caste worker who'd been marginalized, dismissed, or denied. Jake found Kira in a corner, trying to stay invisible after the afternoon's incident. Room for one more, he asked. She stared at him in shock. You came back. Brought friends. A young human named Rita sat down next to Kira with her own tray. Hi. I'm Rita. I fix air recyclers. You're the girl everyone's talking about, right? Kira nodded, speechless. Cool. Want some of my bread? They gave me too much. All across the food court, similar scenes played out. Humans sharing tables, sharing food, breaking every social boundary that had existed for millennia. An engineer named Tom sat with 3 Sarans who'd been eating scraps in a maintenance corridor. A pilot named Grace shared her meal with an elderly Kelthian who looked like he might cry. The station management watched from their office above the food court in horror. Tables mixed. Species that weren't supposed to interact were laughing together. Boundaries dissolved. The sacred hierarchy that had maintained galactic order for thousands of years crumbled in real time. Security drones descended by the dozens, hovering over the mixed tables, projecting warnings. Caste protocol violations in progress. Cease immediately. Nobody moved. An alarm sounded. Red lights flashed. More security arrived. Beth Rodriguez stood up on her chair, raising her voice above the commotion. Listen up, everyone. These protocols you all follow? We didn't sign them. We're not bound by them. And we're not going to follow them. A station security officer approached, a Veltharai in official armor. You are creating a civil disturbance. Disperse immediately or face mass arrest. Arrest all 47 of us. Beth asked. You going to process that paperwork? You going to explain to your supervisors why you arrested every human on the station for eating dinner? The officer hesitated. He looked at the crowd, at the mix of species, at the humans who showed no sign of backing down. The arbiters have been summoned, he said finally. This will not end well for you. Probably not, Beth agreed. But it's the right thing to do. The officer retreated, speaking urgently into his communicator. Jake looked around the food court at his fellow humans, at the low-caste workers who looked stunned and grateful and terrified all at once, at the higher-caste aliens who watched from a distance with expressions of disgust and disbelief. What happens now? Kira asked quietly. Jake shrugged. Honestly? No idea. But whatever happens, you're not facing it hungry. Around them, 4 to 7 humans kept eating, kept sharing, kept breaking the rules that desperately needed to be broken. The revolution had begun over dinner. And it was just getting started. 3 days into the human boycott, Nexus Station was hemorrhaging money. The numbers didn't lie. 17 human cargo vessels had refused to dock. 5 more had undocked early, leaving contracts unfulfilled. Another dozen had diverted to smaller, less convenient stations rather than submit to the caste protocol demands. The economic impact was immediate and brutal. Ships rerouted to smaller stations, even though it meant longer travel times and higher fuel costs. They'd rather lose money than compromise. Cargo piled up in the station's holding bays, undelivered, collecting storage fees that nobody wanted to pay. Contracts went unfulfilled. Deadlines passed. The station's reputation as a reliable trade hub began to crack. And then something unexpected happened. The lower caste workers, emboldened by human support, began work slowdowns. After all, if the humans wouldn't back down, why should they? Sorans who'd always arrived early for their shifts started showing up exactly on time. Kelthians who'd worked through breaks suddenly insisted on taking them. Harvin waste processors, who'd been running on skeleton crews for years, demanded proper staffing levels before continuing work. Nothing violent. Nothing that could be called a strike. Just workers following the rules exactly as written, which was sometimes the most disruptive thing you could do. The station's ventilation system, usually repaired within hours, now took days. Waste processing backed up. Air quality dropped to minimum acceptable levels. The entire station started to smell faintly of recycled air pushed to its limits. Station management panicked. The council called emergency meetings. The hierarchy arbiters issued warnings, threats, fines. But you couldn't find someone who had nothing to lose. And the humans? They had plenty to lose, but they weren't backing down. That's when Jake's shipping company got involved. On the third day, a shuttle arrived carrying Kyle Brooks, Jake's direct supervisor and the regional manager for Stellar Freight Solutions. Kyle was a big guy, ex-military, with gray hair and a face that had seen too many years in space. He'd hired Jake 5 years ago. They'd always gotten along. Jake knew this conversation wasn't going to be pleasant. They met on the deck of Jake's ship, the cargo bay doors open to show the station beyond. Through the viewport, you could see Kira and other Sorans gathered near the human vessels, where the humans had been bringing free meals daily. Someone had set up folding tables. It looked almost like a community picnic, except it was a revolution. "You're destroying your career," Kyle said without preamble. "Our careers. The company's down 15 million credits, Jake. 15 million. In 3 days." Jake stood with his arms crossed, looking out at the station. "I know." "Do you?" "Because the board is demanding answers. They're threatening to pull our entire fleet from this sector. That's 400 jobs, Jake. 400 people who depend on those paychecks." "I know," Jake repeated quietly. Kyle's voice rose. "Then why? Why throw away everything for some aliens you don't even know? This isn't our fight. We're cargo haulers, not social reformers." Someone was hungry, Kyle. She had money, and they wouldn't let her buy food because of a mark on her forehead. A mark she was born with. Jake finally turned to face his supervisor. "How am I supposed to see that and do nothing?" "By being practical." Kyle slammed his hand against the bulkhead. "By understanding that we can't fix every broken thing in the galaxy. By keeping your head down and doing your job." "Is that what you did? When you were in the service?" Kyle went quiet. His jaw worked for a moment. "That's not fair. You got a medal for evacuating civilians from that colony raid on Kara 7. You risked your ship, your crew, everything, because it was the right thing to do. Command threatened you with court-martial. That was different." "How?" Kyle looked away, staring out at the station. At the mixed groups of humans and low-caste workers sharing meals, laughing, building something new. "The board's giving me no choice, Jake. They're ordering your termination. Effective immediately." Jake had expected this, but it still hit hard. 5 years with the company. Good years. Steady work. A career path. All gone. "Yeah," Jake said quietly. "I figured. They want you off this station within 24 hours. If you refuse, they'll blacklist you with every major shipping company in the sector. You'll never haul cargo again." "Okay." Kyle turned to face him, frustrated. "That's it? Just okay? You're throwing away everything you've worked for, and all you can say is okay?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, watching Kira help a younger Saran girl get food from the human mess line. The girl was laughing at something Rita had said. It was probably the first time she'd laughed in weeks. I can't unsee it, Kyle, Jake finally said. I can't watch people starve and just accept it as normal. I can't see kids going hungry while other people laugh about it and think that's just how things are. He shook his head. Maybe that makes me impractical. Maybe that makes me stupid. But I can't do it. Kyle was silent for a long time. Then he sighed, the kind of deep, weary sigh that carried years of compromise and regret. Company's officially recalling you. I have to file the termination paperwork by end of shift. Kyle turned to leave, then paused at the cargo bay door. Off the record? I think you're right. But the board doesn't care about right. They care about profit margins and quarterly reports. I know. For what it's worth, you're the best pilot I ever hired. And I'm sorry it ended like this. Kyle left, and Jake stood alone on his ship, looking out at the station he'd just lost his career over. That night, as Jake packed his belongings, Kira found him. Her eyes were red. You're leaving, she said. It wasn't a question. They're making me. Because of me. Because of us. Her voice broke. We're not worth this. We're not worth you losing everything. Jake stopped packing. He turned to face her fully, and his voice was firm. You know what the worst thing is? That you believe that. That they've made you believe you're worth less than someone else because your species lost a war before you were even born. He shook his head. Where I'm from, we have a saying, all people are created equal. We don't always live up to it. Hell, we fail at it constantly. But we're supposed to try. Kira wiped her eyes. What will happen now? To all of you? Jake looked out at the other human ships, at Beth's freighter, at Tom's cargo hauler, at all 4 to 7 humans who'd decided that some things mattered more than keeping your head down. I don't know, he admitted. But I know this, other species are watching. And they're starting to ask questions. Questions that scare the people in charge. Is that enough? Jake smiled slightly. Sometimes questions are how revolutions start. On day 7 of the boycott, the council called an emergency session. The ornate chamber, usually reserved for ceremonial proceedings and routine administrative approvals, was packed with station officials, corporate representatives, and nervous bureaucrats. The air was thick with tension. The numbers were presented first, as numbers always were in matters of commerce. The station had lost 40% of its traffic. 40%. In 7 days. The graphs projected on the walls showed a nosedive that would have been impressive if it wasn't so catastrophic. 3 major shipping corporations were threatening to permanently reroute. Not just human companies, others too. Species that had watched the human boycott and decided maybe they didn't want to do business with a station that let people starve for arbitrary reasons. But the economics, as dire as they were, weren't even the worst part. Lower caste workers were openly demanding fair wages and equal access to services. Sarans had stopped accepting below minimum payments. Kelthians were refusing overtime without proper compensation. Harvin waste processors had submitted a formal petition, something unheard of, demanding the same medical benefits as higher caste employees. The foundation was cracking. And more concerning to the council members, mid-tier species were beginning to question the caste protocol itself. If humans could ignore it, why couldn't they? If the ancient social order could be challenged, what did that mean for everyone else trapped in the middle? A Draxian merchant captain had been overheard saying, "The humans have a point." A Veltharai engineer had publicly shared a meal with a Saran. Small acts, but each one was a crack in the dam. And dams, once they started breaking, rarely stopped. The council, composed of high-caste species who'd maintained power for millennia, faced an impossible choice: lose the station's economy or compromise the ancient social order that had kept them on top. They argued for hours. The hierarchy arbiter who'd confronted Jake insisted on enforcement. We cannot bow to terrorists and rule breakers. The protocols have maintained galactic stability for 3,000 years. But the station administrator, a pragmatic being who cared more about balance sheets than ancient traditions, had different concerns. Stability doesn't matter if we're bankrupt. We've lost 17% of our revenue in 1 week. 1 week. At this rate, we'll have to shut down non-essential systems within a month. Then arrest the humans, someone suggested. On what charges? They haven't broken any laws they are bound to. Their trade agreements specifically excluded social protocols. We checked. Then revoked their docking privileges. We already threatened that. They left. And now we're losing money because of it. The debate went in circles, each suggestion meeting a wall of practical impossibility. You couldn't force people to do business with you. You couldn't arrest someone for not following rules they never agreed to. And you couldn't stop an idea once it started spreading. Finally, the station administrator stood. We have one option. The only option that preserves both our economy and our future. The room went quiet. We declare Nexus Station a protocol-neutral zone. The response was immediate and explosive. Shouts of outrage. Claims of betrayal. The arbiter looked like he might have a stroke. This is surrender, someone yelled. This is survival, the administrator countered. The caste protocol will remain in effect throughout the galaxy. But within station boundaries, it will be suspended. All vendors serve all species. All public spaces open to all castes. All workers receive equal pay for equal work. The other stations will never follow. They don't have to. We're an experiment. If it fails, the protocols remain unchanged elsewhere. If it succeeds. He shrugged. Perhaps the galaxy learned something. The vote was close. Too close. But economic reality won over tradition, as it usually did when survival was at stake. They chose survival. The announcement came at noon on day 8. Nexus Station would become a protocol-neutral zone, effective immediately. The caste protocol was suspended within station boundaries. All vendors would serve all species at equal prices. All public spaces were open to everyone. Discrimination based on caste would result in fines and loss of business licenses. It was a radical experiment. Most stations refused to follow. The hierarchy arbiters issued formal condemnations. High caste species threatened boycotts of their own. But the human ships returned. And with them came trade, cargo, revenue, and life. Jake stood in the food court that first day of the new order, watching a Saran approach a vendor, the same Draxian who denied Kira a week ago. The vendor looked uncomfortable but processed the order. Credits exchanged. Food was served. No alarms. No security. No drama. Just a person buying lunch. Kira stood beside Jake, hardly believing what she was seeing. Is this real? She whispered. It's real. Over the following days and weeks, things changed. Slowly. Imperfectly. There were still people who refused to adjust, who clutched their prejudices tight. But the rules had changed, and rules shaped behavior over time. Kira got a real engineering position with fair pay. She moved out of her closet-sized quarters into something with an actual window. Other Sarans found work on human ships, where caste had never mattered. The community began to rebuild, not in hiding, but openly. Beth offered Jake a position on her crew. Need a pilot who's dumb enough to start a revolution over lunch, she said with a grin. Jake accepted. A month later, Jake sat in that same food court, eating synthetic noodles and watching the crowd. Dozens of species mingled freely. Children of different castes played together in the open spaces. A Saran family sat next to a Veltharai couple, and nobody cared. It wasn't perfect. Old prejudices died hard. There were still incidents, still hatred, still people who believed in the old ways. But it was different. Kira joined him, setting down her own tray. I've been teaching other Sarans, she said. Engineering skills. Things the humans taught me. We're building something. For ourselves. Something real. That's good. Jake. Yeah? Thank you. For seeing me when everyone else just saw my mark. Jake looked at her, at the fading bioluminescent symbol on her forehead that meant nothing here anymore. You know what I saw, he said. Someone who was hungry. That's all it ever had to be. Around them, the quiet revolution continued. One meal at a time. One kindness at a time. One human who'd refused to accept cruelty as normal, and 4 to 6 others who'd decided to stand with him. The galaxy was vast and old and full of ancient rules that said some people mattered more than others. But maybe, just maybe, it could change. All it took was one person saying 3 simple words, come eat with me. And sometimes, that was enough.